In the far reaches of the galaxy, a network of planets and civilizations thrived under the banner of the Coalition of Worlds. It had been a time of peace and cooperation, with races of all kinds working together to explore the stars, share knowledge, and grow stronger as one. Among the most respected members of the coalition were the Merca. Their intelligence and art had inspired countless beings, and their peaceful nature had made them valuable allies in the fight against threats beyond the galaxy. For centuries, the Merca had been a symbol of what could be achieved when different species worked together. But all that changed in the blink of an eye. A strange and deadly plague began to spread throughout the galaxy. It started quietly at first, a few isolated cases on Merca's homeworld, Serenity. But soon, it grew into a full-scale outbreak. No one knew how or why it started, but one thing was certain: it spread fast. The disease was unlike anything anyone had ever seen before, with symptoms that were horrifying and mysterious. People lost their energy, their strength, their very will to live. Some planets fell into chaos as their populations were devastated by the infection. At first, the galaxy had come together to find a cure. Scientists from all races worked tirelessly to understand the plague and stop it. But as the weeks turned into months, frustration began to set in. The disease spread far beyond the Merca's borders, and many began to wonder if the Merca were to blame for the outbreak. Were they the cause, or had they brought the disease from somewhere else? There were whispers among the other races, rumors that the Merca had hidden the truth, that they were responsible for the catastrophe. Soon, the atmosphere shifted from concern to suspicion. The galaxy's leaders began to turn their backs on their once trusted allies. The Merca were no longer viewed as the great minds they once were, but as a potential threat. The other races feared the plague might have originated from them, or worse, that the Merca had known about it and kept it secret. Slowly but surely, the Coalition of Worlds began to pull away. The once celebrated members of the Alliance found themselves isolated. The Merca, confused and heartbroken, begged for help. But instead of support, they were met with cold indifference. Trade routes were cut off, and supply ships no longer arrived. Embassies that once stood proudly in the capital cities of other planets were abandoned. The Merca were left alone, surrounded by the empty silence of those who had turned their backs on them. The Merca's homeworld, Serenity, became a ghost of its former self. What had once been a bustling center of culture and learning was now a place of fear and uncertainty. The plague continued to spread, weakening their society. The Merca's advanced technology, which had once allowed them to heal and thrive, now seemed powerless against the unseen enemy. They were a race that had contributed so much to the galaxy, but now they were forgotten. The very galaxy they had helped to build had chosen to abandon them in their time of need. It was in this moment of despair that humanity entered the scene. Humanity was still a newcomer to the galactic stage. For centuries, Earth had been a small, insignificant planet at the edge of the galaxy, its people unaware of the vastness beyond their home. But in recent decades, humans had risen quickly, their resourcefulness and determination pushing them into the spotlight. They had built their own spacefaring civilization, exploring the stars and making allies along the way. When Earth's explorers stumbled upon the Merca homeworld, they did not see a race of people abandoned and broken. Instead, they saw a civilization in crisis, struggling to survive despite the odds stacked against them. The humans, led by Admiral Helena Drake, understood the importance of empathy. They saw the truth that the galaxy had missed. The Merca were not responsible for the plague. They had been victims just as much as the other races. The humans would not turn their backs on the Merca. Admiral Drake, a woman of fierce conviction, called a meeting with her fellow leaders back on Earth. She argued that humanity had a duty to help, not only because it was the right thing to do, but because the galaxy itself would be weakened if the Merca were left to die. The humans knew how to fight, how to defend what they cared for, and they would not let the Merca be destroyed by fear and isolation. As the human fleet moved towards Serenity, the question remained, could they help in time? The plague was spreading, and every moment brought the Merca closer to extinction. Yet, as the first ships landed on the planet, humanity's resolve was clear. They were not there to conquer or take what was not theirs. They were there to protect. They were there to defend those who had been abandoned, even when the rest of the galaxy had turned away. And so the first chapter of the Merca's salvation began, not with the mighty races of the galaxy, but with a group of determined humans who would not let the light of hope fade from the stars. As the human fleet approached the Merca homeworld, serenity, a sense of urgency filled the air. The plague had been ravaging the planet for months now, and the Merca people were on the brink of collapse. It was hard to tell where the disease had started, whether it had come from some hidden corner of the galaxy, or if it was an ancient force awakened by some unknown cause. But for the Merca, it hardly mattered anymore. Their world was dying, and their once thriving society was crumbling under the weight of the infection. When Admiral Helena Drake first learned of the Merca's plight, she knew that Earth had to act, and fast. She had led humanity's forces in the distant past, in battles against alien invaders and distant threats, but this was different. This wasn't a fight against an enemy in the traditional sense. The enemy was invisible, unpredictable, and it was inside the very beings they had come to help. Despite the risks, Admiral Drake knew there was no turning back. She had seen the faces of the Merca when she first set foot on their planet. The sadness and fear in their eyes haunted her. How could a galaxy so vast and advanced turn its back on these peaceful people? How could they abandon those who had once stood by their side? Her decision to help was met with resistance back on Earth. There were many who believed that it was not their responsibility. The plague was spreading quickly across the galaxy, and resources were stretched thin. With no known cure and no way to stop the infection, why risk sending their fleet into what seemed like a losing battle? They argued that humanity should focus on their own survival and leave the Merca to face their fate alone. But Admiral Drake was resolute. She was not a leader who shied away from a challenge, especially one that involved saving lives. She had witnessed humanity's rise in the galaxy, and she knew that the values they held, compassion, perseverance, and the willingness to stand up for what was right, were not only what made them human, but what could save the Merca. The human fleet arrived at Serenity's orbit, its sleek ships cutting through the vastness of space. There was no fanfare, no grand welcome, only the silence of a world on the brink of extinction. As the humans descended to the surface, they were greeted by a handful of Merca, weak but grateful. The Merca were unlike any other species humanity had encountered before. Their features were delicate, almost ethereal, with skin that shimmered faintly in the light. But it was their eyes that reflected a history of art, wisdom, and beauty, that spoke to the humans more than anything. "We didn't ask for this," said the Merca leader, Lixura, her voice trembling with both exhaustion and defiance. "But we are not without hope. If there is a cure, we will find it together. You don't have to save us." Admiral Drake's response was simple. "We didn't come here to leave you behind. We came to help. And together, we will find a way." The humans quickly began setting up a makeshift base on Serenity. The Merca's medical facilities, once cutting edge, were now barely functional due to the plague's relentless toll. The humans, armed with the latest technology and an unshakable resolve, immediately went to work. The medical teams worked alongside the Merca scientists, sharing knowledge, scanning data, and running tests. The hope was small, but it was there. The first step was understanding the disease, and that meant getting to the heart of it, the chrysalis. The chrysalis was no ordinary disease. It wasn't a simple virus or bacterial infection. It was a bioengineered entity, a living organism that spread like wildfire, altering the genetic makeup of its host. But the real mystery was how it had come to infect the Merca so quickly. Had it been designed? And if so, by whom? As the days passed, Admiral Drake grew more concerned. The more they uncovered about the chrysalis, the more they realized how deeply rooted it was in the history of the galaxy. The disease was not just a random act of nature. It had been planted for a reason, and the Merca had been its unknowing victims. The human fleet sent out more ships to scout the nearby systems, searching for any signs of who might be behind this attack. The Merca, meanwhile, did what they could to assist, though their strength was fading. Their technology, though advanced, was not enough to fully combat the plague on its own. But they were not helpless. The Merca were known for their incredible knowledge and artistry, and they had a deep understanding of biology and the natural world. If anyone could help find the cure, it was the Merca, working hand in hand with the humans. It was a partnership born out of necessity, but also one that sparked a deep connection between the two races. The humans, with their boldness and drive, and the Merca, with their wisdom and patience, made an unlikely but powerful team. And as the days turned into weeks, they began to see small signs of progress. The plague had not yet been stopped, but there was a glimmer of hope on the horizon. Admiral Drake, despite the heavy burden of responsibility, felt a sense of pride as she watched the humans and Merca working side by side. They were no longer strangers. They were allies, fighting for a common cause. And in that moment, she realized that humanity's place in the galaxy wasn't just about claiming power or resources. It was about standing with those in need, lifting them up when the rest of the universe would let them fall. As the sun rose over Serenity's broken surface, Admiral Drake looked to the future. There was much more to do, and the road ahead was uncertain. But humanity had already made its mark. They had chosen to defend the Merca, to be their champions in a galaxy that had turned its back on them. And that choice would define the future of both races forever. As the humans and the Merca worked side by side on Serenity, the atmosphere in the galaxy began to shift. What had once seemed like a distant crisis on a remote planet was now a political firestorm. The coalition of worlds, once a united force, had splintered in its response to the Merca's plight. Most of the galaxy's leaders had already decided the Merca were beyond saving, but the actions of humanity changed everything. The sight of human ships arriving at Serenity's orbit, the promise of their protection, stirred something in the hearts of the other races, something that had been buried under fear and uncertainty for far too long. But not all reactions were positive. Across the galaxy, the leaders of the coalition, who had already turned their backs on the Merca, watched with growing concern. They had believed their decision to abandon the Merca was final, a way to protect their own worlds from the spreading plague. But now, humanity, a newcomer to the galactic stage, was challenging the very foundation of the coalition. How could they allow humans to interfere in a crisis that was already deemed unsolvable? What would this mean for the balance of power? The Galactic Council, a group of the most influential leaders, convened in a remote space station on the edge of known space. Tensions were high. A decision had to be made, and fast. The coalition could not risk the perception that humanity was growing too powerful, too influential, especially when it came to the fate of the Merca. One by one, the leaders of the other races spoke, each with their own concerns. The Valorians, a proud and ancient race known for their military might, were among the most vocal in their disapproval. Their representative, General Carr, stood in front of the council, his cold eyes scanning the room. "This is madness," General Carr said, his voice low but firm. "We are talking about the future of the entire galaxy. The Merca have failed us. The plague they unleashed could destroy all of us. And yet, Earth chooses to protect them. Why? What is their true motive?" The room fell silent, and many of the leaders exchanged uneasy glances. They had all heard rumors of the human fleet's actions. Humanity was different from the other races. They didn't fight for power or dominance. They fought to protect those who could not protect themselves. It was an ideal that many in the galaxy found hard to believe, even harder to accept. But General Carr's words struck a chord. Fear was a powerful thing, and the idea of a galaxy ruled by humans was unsettling. Admiral Helena Drake, back on Serenity, had no idea of the political turmoil unfolding across the galaxy. Her focus was entirely on the Merca. With every passing day, they made small but steady progress. The research teams were piecing together fragments of the puzzle, understanding more about the plague and how it spread. The Merca scientists, though weakened by the disease, were still brilliant. Together with human researchers, they had discovered that the chrysalis, the parasite responsible for the plague, was not a natural organism. It was engineered, designed to spread quickly and infect a wide range of species. But the more they learned, the more questions arose. Who could have created such a disease? Why target the Merca in particular? And most pressing of all, who was behind it? As Admiral Drake stood in the research facility, studying the latest data, she couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The Merca were not the only ones in danger. If the plague could be weaponized, if the chrysalis could be replicated, it could be used against anyone. The entire galaxy could be at risk. Meanwhile, far from Serenity, the political pressure continued to build. The leaders of the coalition could no longer ignore humanity's involvement. They knew that the longer the humans were left unchecked, the stronger their influence would become. So, they began to make their move. A covert mission was planned to disrupt humanity's efforts. A faction within the coalition, made up of those who believed in strict control and who saw humanity's rise as a threat, sent a fleet of warships to intercept the human ships at Serenity. The mission was clear: stop the humans from helping the Merca and force them to withdraw from the system. Back on Serenity, Admiral Drake was unaware of the impending threat. Her focus was on the research and helping the Merca recover. But as the fleet began to move toward the planet, a series of alarms went off in the human command center. The first reports came in slowly, almost imperceptibly. An unidentified fleet was heading toward Serenity's orbit. The humans were caught off guard. They had expected some resistance from the galaxy's leaders, but they hadn't anticipated a direct military response. As the fleet of enemy ships grew closer, the mood shifted from calm to tense. Admiral Drake immediately ordered her forces into position, preparing for a confrontation she hoped could be avoided. The battle that followed was unlike any the galaxy had seen in recent years. The human fleet, smaller and less experienced in galactic-scale conflict, fought fiercely to protect the Merca. They were not just defending their ships or their technology, they were defending their ideals. The Merca, watching from the surface, could only hope that their champions would hold strong. As the two fleets clashed in the vast emptiness of space, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. The battle was more than just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the future of the galaxy. Would humanity's compassion be enough to change the course of history, or would the fear and mistrust of the old powers prove stronger? The battle in space raged on above Serenity. It was not just a clash of ships, but a clash of ideals. Humanity, with its unshakable belief in protecting the weak and standing up for what was right, faced off against the hardened forces of the coalition, who saw the Merca as a liability. The stakes had never been higher. Admiral Helena Drake stood at the command center of the flagship Vanguard, watching the battle unfold on the screens before her. The enemy fleet was composed of sleek, powerful ships, far more advanced than anything the humans had, but the humans were not backing down. Their ships moved with precision, dodging blasts and launching counterattacks with courage and determination. "We can't let them get past us," Admiral Drake said, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. Her crew looked to her for guidance, and they had all come to trust her leadership. She had made the right call when she brought humanity to the Merca's side, and now she was fighting to protect them, no matter the cost. As the Vanguard fired its weapons, a series of explosions rocked the enemy ships. The human fleet was holding their ground, but it was clear they couldn't keep this up forever. The enemy fleet was relentless, and they had the advantage in terms of numbers and firepower. If the humans couldn't find a way to end this conflict quickly, Serenity itself would be caught in the crossfire. Down on the surface of the planet, the Merca watched the battle unfold in horror. Lixura, the leader of the Merca, stood in a command center built with the help of the humans, watching the battle on a large screen. The Merca had always been a peaceful race, focused on the pursuit of knowledge, art, and harmony. They had never been involved in a war, never had to fight for their survival. Now, they were witnessing a fight they could not avoid. Their allies, the humans, were risking everything to protect them. It was a sacrifice the Merca could never have imagined. Lixira's mind raced. The humans were fighting not for their own gain, but for the survival of a race that had been abandoned by the rest of the galaxy. The Merca were deeply grateful, but the weight of their gratitude was heavy. They had always believed in peaceful solutions, in diplomacy and dialogue. They had never expected to find themselves in the middle of a war. "I never imagined it would come to this," Lixira whispered to herself, "that the galaxy would be torn apart by fear, by misunderstandings, by old grudges." Despite her sorrow, she knew one thing. The Merca had to do their part. The humans could not fight this battle alone. As the Merca worked tirelessly to help with the research into the plague, they also began to strategize, offering assistance to the human forces in the battle above. The Merca had a deep understanding of space navigation and advanced technology, and though their strength had been diminished by the plague, they still had much to offer. They could not remain passive observers. Back in the sky, Admiral Drake's fleet continued to hold its ground. But as the enemy ships closed in, it became clear that time was running out. One of the larger ships, a formidable battleship known as the Goliath, launched a devastating salvo, and one of the human ships exploded in a flash of light. A sharp gasp echoed through the command center as crew members watched in shock. "Admiral, we've lost the Defender," reported Commander Perez, her voice tight with concern. "We can't hold them much longer." Admiral Drake's heart sank. The Defender had been one of their strongest ships. Losing it was a blow, but it wasn't the end. They had to keep fighting, for the Merca, for the galaxy, for the future. "Don't stop," she said, her voice firm. "We will hold our position until we can find another way. Keep fighting." But even as she gave the order, she knew they couldn't do it alone. Something had to change, and that change came in an unexpected form. From the Merca's surface, a signal was sent to the human fleet, a signal containing information that could turn the tide of the battle. The Merca had discovered something vital. They had identified a weakness in the enemy's fleet. It was a small opening in the defenses, a gap in their formation that could be exploited. Admiral Drake's eyes lit up when the message came through. The Merca had been working nonstop, and now their research had revealed something that could save them all. "Commander Perez, we've got it," the Admiral said. "There's a weakness in their formation. Prepare to exploit it." The human fleet shifted into a new formation, moving swiftly and decisively. The Merca's data was accurate. With coordinated precision, the humans targeted the gap in the enemy's defenses. One by one, the human ships launched their weapons, striking the enemy ships with surprising force. The battle that had seemed so one-sided began to shift in the humans' favor. The Goliath was forced to retreat, and the remaining enemy ships hesitated. They had underestimated the determination of humanity. They had underestimated the power of unity between two very different races. As the enemy fleet began to pull back, Admiral Drake allowed herself a brief moment of relief. The battle was far from over, but they had made a critical breakthrough. The tide had turned. But the true cost of the battle was only beginning to be realized. Humanity's victory in space had come at a price. The Merca, despite their best efforts, were still fighting a battle against the plague that had taken so much from them. And while they had held their own in the battle above, the true fight for their survival was far from over. The battle above Serenity had ended, but the war was far from over. The enemy fleet had retreated, but humanity's struggle to protect the Merca was only just beginning. The humans had proven their strength in space, but the true test was on the surface, where the Merca were still fighting the deadly plague that threatened to wipe them out. Admiral Helena Drake stood on the observation deck of the Vanguard, staring at the glowing planet below. Serenity had been devastated by the disease, but the humans' victory in the battle had bought them some precious time. Time to search for a cure. Time to find a way to stop the plague from spreading further. But the time they had gained was running out. The Merca were still suffering. their numbers dwindling with every passing day. Despite their advanced technology and wisdom, they were helpless against the chrysalis. They had never faced an enemy like this before, one that was both biological and engineered to be unstoppable. In the research labs on Serenity's surface, the human and Merca teams worked tirelessly, analyzing every piece of data they could gather. The Merca's knowledge of biology and their deep understanding of the natural world were invaluable, but there was something more that humanity brought to the table: determination. They had never given up on their fight, and they weren't about to start now. "I'm afraid we're running out of options," Dr. Kayla Monroe, the human scientist leading the research, said one evening as she stared at a screen filled with data. "The chrysalis is unlike anything we've ever encountered. It's adapting faster than we can react." Lixara, the leader of the Merca, stood beside her, her eyes tired but determined. "We cannot give up," she said softly. "The Merca have always fought for survival, but never like this. We must find a way, together." Dr. Monroe nodded, but her expression was grim. The Merca were brave, but even their will could not stop the disease. The human team had been working on a possible cure, but it seemed every solution they came up with only brought them one step closer to failure. Then, in the midst of the chaos, an unexpected idea came to light. During one of their many research meetings, a young Merca scientist named Julara suggested something unusual. She spoke with a quiet confidence, despite her exhaustion. "I think the answer may lie in the Merca's ancient symbiotic relationships," Julara said. "Our people have always lived in harmony with nature, with creatures that helped us grow and thrive. Perhaps we can use the chrysalis' own biology against it." Her idea was met with curiosity. For centuries, the Merca had studied the creatures and plants of their world, learning from them, living with them. Their symbiotic relationship with their environment had made them one of the most advanced races in the galaxy. But could this ancient knowledge be the key to stopping the plague? Dr. Monroe was intrigued. "Are you suggesting that we use some form of biological weapon?" she asked, cautious but willing to explore every possibility. Julara shook her head. "No, not a weapon. More like a cure, a way to use the chrysalis' natural processes against it. If we can isolate a certain enzyme found in our native flora, it may have the power to disrupt the chrysalis' ability to replicate." It was a risky idea, but it was the first real lead they had in days. Dr. Monroe, along with a team of human and Merca scientists, began working on the plan immediately. They had no time to waste. The more they studied the chrysalis, the more they realized it was not just a biological threat. It was a threat to everything the Merca had built. If they couldn't stop it soon, the Merca would cease to exist as a people. Back on the Vanguard, Admiral Drake received a report from the surface. The research teams had made a breakthrough. The idea was unconventional, but it was a step forward. She immediately ordered her fleet to prepare for the next phase of the mission. They would provide any support necessary to the Merca's efforts, including transportation for the new compound they hoped to develop. As the days passed, the human and Merca teams worked around the clock to develop the enzyme that could save the Merca. The research was painstaking and slow, but with each passing day, their progress grew. The two species, so different in many ways, were becoming a team in every sense of the word. They had united for a common cause, and that cause was more important than any differences they might have had. But even as they worked toward a cure, the political landscape of the galaxy was changing. The coalition of worlds, who had once turned their back on the Merca, was now taking notice of humanity's involvement. Some saw it as a sign of hope, a new chapter in galactic diplomacy. Others, however, were worried. Humanity's growing influence was unsettling, and the decision to aid the Merca was not without consequences. In a secret meeting held on a neutral space station, the leaders of several key coalition members discussed the rising power of Earth. General Kerr, still furious over the humans' interference, spoke with venom. "We cannot allow this to continue," he said, his voice filled with anger. "Humanity's actions are destabilizing everything we've worked for. They are making a mockery of the very system that has kept peace in this galaxy for centuries. If they are allowed to continue down this path, there will be no stopping them. But not everyone agreed. A few voices spoke up in favor of humanity's intervention, recognizing that the humans had acted out of a sense of compassion and justice. They argued that humanity was not interested in power, but in protecting those who could not protect themselves. Despite the internal division, one thing was clear. Humanity's presence in the galaxy was undeniable, and it was beginning to change the way the galaxy saw itself. On Serenity, the work continued. The Merca and the humans had come together in ways that no one could have predicted. They had become allies, not by force, but by choice. And together, they had the power to overcome even the greatest of challenges. The tension on Serenity was palpable. The research team had made significant strides in isolating the enzyme that could potentially halt the spread of the chrysalis. Yet, despite their progress, there was a growing sense of urgency. Every hour they spent in the lab brought them closer to a possible cure, but it also brought them closer to the point of no return. Time was running out for the Merca. Admiral Helena Drake stood at the command center, staring out at the swirling blue planet below. Serenity had become a symbol of both hope and desperation. Hope for the Merca, who had been saved from immediate destruction by the humans' timely intervention, but desperation because the cure they sought was still out of reach. "Admiral," Commander Perez said, her voice breaking through the Admiral's thoughts. "We've received new intelligence. A fleet of coalition ships is heading towards us. They're making their way into the system." Drake's heart sank. The last thing they needed right now was another conflict, especially with the cure so close. "What's their position?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "About an hour away," Perez replied. "They're coming in fast. Looks like they're preparing for a confrontation." Admiral Drake's mind raced. The Coalition had been watching humanity's involvement in the Merca's plight closely. And now, it seemed, their worst fears were about to come true. The Coalition could not allow humanity's influence to grow any stronger, especially not in the Merca's system. "We can't afford a war right now," Drake said firmly. "Prepare the fleet for a defensive posture, but no aggressive actions unless we're forced into it." The command center was filled with a flurry of activity as crew members worked quickly to respond to the approaching threat. Drake's thoughts, however, were elsewhere. Her attention returned to the surface of Serenity, where the human and Merca research teams were making final adjustments to the enzyme. If the Coalition attacked before they had a chance to test it, everything they had worked for would be lost. Meanwhile, on the surface of Serenity, Lixera, the leader of the Merca, watched the sky nervously. The news of the approaching Coalition fleet had reached her, and she knew that their survival now depended on the humans. She had never wanted to rely on others, but the chrysalis had forced their hand. The Merca were dying, and without the humans' help, there was no hope. "It's not enough," Lixera muttered under her breath, her eyes scanning the horizon. "We are too few now, and they are too many. Can we really fight back?" Chilara, the young Merca scientist who had suggested using their ancient symbiotic knowledge, stood beside her. "We are not alone," she said softly, though her voice held uncertainty. "The humans have shown us that they will fight for us. Together, we can stand strong." Lixera turned to Chilara, her expression serious. "Together, yes. But what if the Coalition does not understand our cause? What if they see the humans' intervention as a threat, and we are caught in the middle of a war we never asked for?" "We will stand by the humans," Chilara said firmly, her eyes filled with determination. "They have fought for us, for our survival. We cannot turn away from them now." Lixera nodded slowly, though the weight of the situation was not lost on her. "Then we will stand with them, whatever the cost." Back on the Vanguard, Admiral Drake was growing increasingly anxious. The fleet of Coalition ships was closing in rapidly, and there was no way to avoid a confrontation now. Drake had hoped that diplomacy would prevail, but with the situation escalating, it was clear that the Coalition had no intention of backing down. The humans had to make a stand, not just for themselves, but for the Merca. "We have no choice," Admiral Drake muttered to herself. She stood tall, her voice commanding as she addressed her crew. "Prepare to defend Serenity at all costs. We will not let them take this from us. We will fight, not for war, but for survival." The human fleet moved into position, their ships forming a defensive ring around Serenity. The approaching coalition fleet, led by General Carr, came to a halt just outside the system's outer reaches. A tense silence filled the communication channels as both sides prepared for the inevitable conflict. "We are here under orders from the coalition," General Carr's voice crackled through the comms. "This is your final warning, humans. Leave the Merca behind and withdraw. If you do not comply, we will be forced to take action." Admiral Drake's gaze hardened as she responded, her voice unwavering. "The Merca have the right to live. They are not your property to abandon or destroy. We will not back down." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, as if in response to her words, the enemy fleet powered up their weapons. The countdown to conflict had begun. As the first salvo of energy blasts tore through space, the Vanguard and the human fleet retaliated with everything they had. The battle that followed was a desperate struggle, humanity fighting not just to defend a planet, but to preserve everything they had worked for. The coalition's ships were powerful, their technology advanced, but humanity's resolve was unmatched. Amid the chaos, the researchers on Serenity continued their work. The final tests on the enzyme were completed, and the first doses were ready. The solution that could save the Merca was now in their hands. But just as the tide seemed to turn in favor of the humans, a new threat emerged, a powerful weapon hidden in the coalition fleet, one that had the potential to wipe out entire systems in a single strike. Admiral Drake knew that the stakes had never been higher. If they couldn't stop the weapon, it would mean the end of everything they had fought for. But as long as they had breath in their lungs, humanity would not give up. They would fight, not just for their survival, but for the Merca and for the galaxy they had come to love. The battle raged above Serenity, with humanity's fleet locked in a deadly standoff against the coalition. The enemy's powerful warships unleashed their might upon the human fleet, but the humans stood firm, unwilling to give an inch. Their commitment to the Merca and their mission to protect the helpless was unwavering. It was a fight for survival, not just for humanity, but for an entire species at the brink of extinction. Admiral Helena Drake stood tall on the bridge of the Vanguard, her gaze fixed on the chaos unfolding outside. The energy blasts from both sides lit up the space around Serenity, creating a dazzling yet terrifying light show. The Vanguard shuddered under the impact of an enemy blast, but the crew remained steadfast. They had been through so much, and they weren't about to let this be the end. "Admiral, we've lost the Sentinel," Commander Perez reported, her voice tight with urgency. "We can't keep up the defense much longer. The coalition is pushing us back." Drake's heart sank. Losing the ship was never easy, but in the middle of a battle like this, it was devastating. She forced herself to stay calm, her voice steady despite the growing pressure. "We hold the line," she ordered. "Every ship counts. We will not retreat." On Serenity's surface, the Merca scientists and human researchers worked feverishly, preparing the final doses of the enzyme that could cure the chrysalis plague. Time was running out, and they knew that the coalition's weapon was just moments away from being fully powered up. The weapon could destroy everything in its path: Serenity, the fleet, and the Merca's hope for survival. But the cure, the last chance to save the Merca, was ready. Dr. Kayla Monroe, the lead human scientist, stood over a table filled with vials of the enzyme. She looked at Julara, the young Merca scientist who had helped guide them toward this solution. The two women had become more than just allies. They had become friends, united in their mission to save the Merca. "It's ready," Dr. Monroe said, her voice filled with determination. "But we need to get it to the Merca survivors quickly. If we don't, it will be too late." Julara nodded, her expression filled with resolve. "We've lost so many already. We can't lose any more. This is our last chance. The Merca had suffered greatly during the plague, and even though many had already succumbed to it, the remaining survivors still had a fighting chance. If the enzyme worked as they hoped, it could stop the disease in its tracks. The only question now was whether they could deliver the cure before the Coalition's devastating weapon fired. Back in space, the human fleet continued to battle fiercely against the Coalition. The Vanguard had taken damage, but it was still holding strong. The humans were giving everything they had, using every tactic they knew to keep the enemy at bay. But the Coalition wasn't relenting. General Kerr's fleet was relentless, determined to crush the human resistance. "We can't stop them," Perez said, her voice tight with worry. "They're about to deploy the weapon." Drake clenched her fists, her mind racing. The weapon, an ancient device of unimaginable power, was the Coalition's last resort. If it activated, it would obliterate everything in its path, including Serenity. But even in the face of overwhelming odds, Admiral Drake refused to give up. "We're not done yet," she said, her voice filled with unwavering determination. "We'll hold them off until we can make our move." As the enemy fleet prepared to launch the weapon, Admiral Drake made a bold decision. She would risk everything to protect the Merca and stop the weapon from firing. With a single order, she commanded the Vanguard to move directly into the path of the enemy fleet, putting herself and her crew in the line of fire. "Admiral, are you sure about this?" Commander Perez asked, her voice filled with concern. Drake's eyes never left the enemy ships. "I'm sure. We fight for the future. We fight for the Merca." With the Vanguard leading the charge, the human fleet moved into a defensive formation, creating a barrier between the Coalition and Serenity. The enemy fired their weapons, and the Vanguard took the brunt of the blast. Sparks flew, and alarms blared as the ship's shields struggled to hold up against the onslaught. But the ship didn't falter. It pushed forward, inch by inch. On the surface, Jalara and Dr. Monroe watched the situation unfold through the communication channels. The human fleet was giving everything they had, and it was clear they were fighting to the bitter end. "Time to deliver the cure," Jalara said, turning to Dr. Monroe. Together, they loaded the enzyme vials onto a shuttle, preparing for a daring mission. The shuttle would make its way through the chaos of the battle and land at the Merca's medical facility. It was a risky move, but they had no other choice. The Merca's only hope lay in their ability to act quickly. As the shuttle launched, the battle continued to rage around them. The humans were giving everything they had to protect Serenity, but the time was ticking down. The Coalition's weapon was almost fully charged, and it would be ready to fire any moment. Then, just as the weapon began to power up, a strange thing happened. The Merca, led by Lixora, had joined the fight. In a final act of unity, the Merca activated their ancient defense systems, long dormant, but now needed more than ever. A massive energy pulse erupted from Serenity's surface, creating a protective shield that enveloped the human fleet, blocking the weapon's energy. For a moment, there was silence. The Coalition had been stopped. The weapon was neutralized. And the human fleet, though battered and broken, had won. Together, humanity and the Merca had saved not only themselves, but the galaxy itself. The battle had been long and difficult, but it was over. The Merca were safe, and humanity had proven, once again, that no force in the galaxy could stand against their determination to protect those who needed it most. Admiral Drake, though exhausted, stood tall, her eyes filled with pride. "We did it," she whispered to herself. It had been a hard-fought victory, but it had been a victory for the future, for peace, for compassion, and for the unbreakable bond between humanity and the Merca.